Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is the Sunday show on Hromadske International, the only prime-time show explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm in English, and I'm Natalia Humenyuk. Tonight we have an extraordinary debate and extraordinary panel. The issue is that the Donald Trump rhetoric regarding Russia, of course, creates the widespread fear in Ukraine, not just there, that there would be push for some new kind of Yalta II agreement with Russia at Ukraine's expenses. At the same time, it all coincides with the information campaign. Maybe Ukraine should speak and be more pragmatic, speak about its neutrality. There were a number of phone calls between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, Angela Merkel, and American president. There were a number of meetings in Washington this week. That's all we would also mention in this program, but the task of the program is really to understand what also is the position of Ukraine, what are the key decision makers, political analysts in Ukraine who also can probably represent the public point of view are thinking about all that. And also we have the experts on transatlantic relations to join us from different capitals. So that would be in a couple of minutes, but I would remind that you can download our podcast on Mixcloud if you want an audio version only of the show, and you can see full version of all our interviews as well our Russian and Ukrainian language content on our webpage en.hromadske.uk. And we'll be back in a second. So we have this extraordinary panel. We have IVANNA KLYMPUSH-TSINTSADZE, who is a Vice Prime Minister on European integration of Ukraine. We have also Paul NILAND, a Kyiv-based writer, founder of Statement Email. Also, LITRA is a senior researcher at Institute of World Policy, a Kyiv-based think tank. And also we have Alexei Semeny, who is a political analyst and director of the Institute for Global Transformation. And Volodymyr Yermolenko, who is, besides he's a journalist at Hromadske, director of European project at Internews. In generally, so what the world should understand at these tumultuous times that, you know, everybody thinking, well, if there would be any renegotiate, we would renegotiate the deal. Of course, there is a pressure from Washington, from Moscow, but what Ukraine can do in this environment?
Well, first and foremost, I think we should be making sure that the world is not making any more the mistake of not taking into consideration thoughts and feelings and desires and choices that have been made by the free Ukrainian nation, free Ukrainian people. And that's, I think, the mistake that the West and Russia seem to be repeating over time, and that has been the case several times in the 20th century, when different divisions of Ukraine have been happening and when Ukrainian voice was not heard. I think during the last couple of decades, or rather even last decade, Ukrainians have proven very clearly that they do understand what they want for themselves, and that they are capable of protecting their own choice, and they are capable of not only reacting but proacting. And so therefore that's the first thing that I would very much make sure that everybody remembers. And obviously the whole discourse right now in the whole world is pretty challenging for everybody, because everybody has to regroup, so to say, internally in all the European capitals.
There would be also the argument that maybe it's a bit of the wishful thinking. We'll starting the debate, and Alexei, what would be yours, point of view?
Firstly, domestic, and the second one more related to all our foreign partners and what the situation is being changed. If we think about that it is possible just to come back to the world which we had 10 years before or even 20 years before, it's not possible, unfortunately or fortunately. So now it's a huge question. We Ukrainians should understand very clearly that for us, probably there will be no definite, it's my perception, no definite strong ally which would like to fight for us except ourselves. there will be no probably grand coalition for Ukraine, which will be definitely on our side all the time. And then it comes to the domestic situation. We can count on the position that we Ukrainians decide on ourselves everything, and everybody else should just listen to us and then come to some deal with us based on our perception. Yes, theoretically it is absolutely right, but practically now, after 3 years, what we do experience in many of the capitals, Western capitals, I reiterate, starting from Washington, then to Berlin, Paris, and many others, they are quite, this is a phrase, fatigue of Ukraine. Why? Ukraine succeeded probably not to deliver too much success stories for the West, as they hoped, or as we Ukrainians hoped too much. And when we come with this, some list of our red lines, requirements, the guys in the West just take these requirements, say, you are not in the position to deal with us like you want, just to have these clear statements and we will follow. No, guys, we have our agenda. If you don't follow our agenda, okay, you will be alone. If you follow our agenda, let's just elaborate on this. And this is a very difficult situation because it requires two things. Either we follow on the previous course, and we should be quite united, quite strong, and most of all, we should deliver successes, especially in economics as base. Or we should take some compromises for the sake of the future, because now the question for Ukraine literally is just the aim number one, to survive.
Very recent talks, we were all following the discussion and a phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, maybe paying too much attention. You know, there was no, really a big news from there. The sanctions hadn't been lifted. But Paul, I'll give a floor to you.
Ukraine is asking to be respected as a sovereign and independent country that makes its own decisions, that will make whatever alliances and partnerships Ukrainians empower their elected authorities to make on their behalf. That's all that Ukraine's asking for. And when we talk about going back to the Yalta kind of idea and the great powers who divide up countries into spheres of influence, the phrase sphere of influence, if you think about it, if you break it down, what it actually means is denial of sovereignty. If somebody somewhere accepts that Ukraine is going to be in anybody's sphere of influence, it means that Ukraine's sovereign choices are being limited. And that's all that Ukraine's asking for. Ukraine isn't asking for boots on the ground from anyone else, although Ukraine is very grateful to have had military training from the British, from the Americans, from the Canadians, and from various other partners. Ukraine has asked that weapons be sold to Ukraine. I think Ukraine has had a reasonable look at the neutrality position and said, that's not working out. Russia is occupying 7% of Ukraine's territory right now, and so Ukraine, rightfully, is seeking partnerships to enable Ukraine to defend herself and to defend her sovereign territory, right?
I would say just partly. This debate were also started by this all kind of the publication we have, which, Volodya, you named as a part of the information campaign, and in particular this opinion page op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by Viktor Pinchuk, a Ukrainian oligarch, where basically it was shown that Ukraine should stay neutral and temporarily eliminate European Union membership, then that Crimea issue could be delayed, the discussion of it. And we can't also say that it's totally not present. That was written by the Ukrainian anyways. Well,
yes, it was written by a Ukrainian, but he's definitely not representing the whole nation. If you look at the public opinion polls, still that NATO membership is still very popular, and EU membership is still also very popular. And
still, it has risen.
It has risen, yes.
Right.
Yeah. And coming back to what Paul was saying, the neutrality argument can be extended to other countries. Remember Georgia. The whole world ignored Russian aggression in Georgia in 2008. We Ukrainians considered, I think many experts were saying that Ukraine is the next. This is how the war in Georgia was perceived in Ukraine, but not throughout the world. But let me remind that basically the incentive to the aggression was the Bucharest summit of NATO, which was in April 2008. And just because Georgia was denied and Ukraine was denied the membership action plan in NATO, the aggression was possible in August. The same story with Moldova. Moldova was forced to neutrality as a condition to take Transnistria back, but Transnistria is still not a part of Moldova. So we can argue many things in a response to this neutrality thing. I think what is wrong in this argument is that basically the success of Ukraine is dependent on this EU integration thing. I mean, we always arguing inside Ukraine that the EU integration is precisely about internal reforms, internal changes, not about the particular membership. It's like an education process, and the arguments of these guys is just, look, EU integration is not on the agenda in the coming years. But our argument is, look, if you are if you entered the primary school, your university degree is not on the agenda in the coming years, but it doesn't mean that you should drop out from the primary school, right? So so this is a question of time, and I think if when Alexei was talking about concessions, some compromises, I think Ukraine should be ready for some compromises, but these compromises should concern time. I think time is thing that we can talk about. For example, okay, EU membership not tomorrow, but in some time. We
don't risk to get it tomorrow anyway.
Yes, but this is something we can discuss. And again, if we're denying sovereignty and territorial integrity, as Paul was saying, this can make global consequences.
But Leo, you represent a think tank, like on international politics, and we really sometimes know that some of the compromises are inevitable anyways in the long term, and Minsk could be a compromise, of course, but we can take the defense position, say that don't do anything, and we wouldn't do any. But what are possibilities of what compromises are possible, if any?
Well, it depends. I mean, we have on the one hand we have the idea which just mentioned about the neutrality. We don't see traction in the society, or we don't see support in the society for this idea. For instance, we have about 24% of population who might support neutrality, for instance. But second, I think we forget about one important issue, which is a country which is under aggression cannot be neutral. Precisely because neutrality can be only a third party to a certain conflict, and Ukraine is not a third party, but it's a target. This is a second important issue. And I think one more important element in all debate about neutrality is that one needs the conditions for such a discussion to take place. I mean, neutrality would require not having foreign troops on the territory of Ukraine, which means that we need to have a rollback of Russian troops in the east of Ukraine and in Crimea. And that would create the proper condition for Ukraine to become neutral, if there would be such a will. I understand that maybe Alexei, who is a representative of Ukrainian realism, would say would say that this is impossible because Ukraine is not in the condition to impose certain preconditions. But otherwise, I don't see how could Ukraine exist if we can just drop our own position and accept the protectorate, accept the conditions which are imposed by outside world. So this is quite problematic from a position that, from a position of a person who sees Ukraine as an independent state.
You have something to reply?
Yeah, of course, I have.
Really shortly, we will.
Let's talk about just this thesis of neutral. I do agree that now it's not on the agenda due to different reasons, both domestical and not only internal one. But in general, actually the question will arise in some time. Because if we see now even the polls and the pictures you mentioned, your poll made by your institution, and then the second one, TNS together with your institution, much more interesting what the second one question about the models of the countries, which do the people prefer, and probably not other three guys do know about what was the number one and number two countries, which Ukrainians prefer at the models. And this is actually the indication that here, domestically, more and more, actually the position of the people is not going definitely in the direction which probably, be it people in power or be it the majority of experts, are in favor of. And we have two choices. Either to accept as it is and to acknowledge that this is actually the trend which goes from the people, and we should change our position, or we would like to change these trends in the people mindset, which would be quite difficult. But once more, coming to the concession question, it's very hard. And if you look at the history of many nations which survived as a nations and the states, there were always the periods when they came to some turning points. Either I make concession and I will survive, or I will be absolutely sovereign, make no concession, will die, but very good. It will be a very good example for the century that I died, but I was absolutely right. I'm in the position not to die.
The problem
It doesn't matter.
countries which made concessions didn't
The question
get
is about
anything.
concessions, really.
Why
Didn't
are we
get
asking
anything.
concessions from the victim? Why are we not asking concessions
Because,
from the aggressor?
because we are weak. We are weak.
And
This is not
so,
an
therefore, you are suggesting, if I read you right, that you are suggesting, okay, let's make one concession, let's agree to the status quo right now, and then where is the guarantee? I would like to hear from you. What do you base your guarantee on, or your expectation on, that Russia would decide that this is it, that this is exactly what it wanted? We do very well understand, as opposed to very many of our partners, that unfortunately Russia's plans are much wider, and Russia is not interested in the Ukrainian East or Crimea only. Russia is very much interested in making sure that Ukraine does not succeed, that Ukraine does not exist, that Ukraine is a failed state. And my question about Ukraine fatigue is really, where is the Russia fatigue? I think that the whole world should be really Russia fatigued from the lies that they are putting on the table, from the actions that they are putting on the table, from the whole policies that they are suggesting for the whole world. So with regard to concessions, I think Ukraine has really, over this 3 years, very painful years, has made its share of compromises and its share of really, really serious concessions. And I do not know, from my perspective, how would I agree that 10,000 people that have died in the East and 22,500 that have got wounded in the East, did they die for nothing?
2 million which are retrieved.
Even more so, right. Not
Yes, yeah.
2 million, it's a bit less than that, but still, is this something that we would agree that this is in vain, for nothing? So I just cannot understand this. Moreover, what Paul was saying with regard to neutrality, yes, we've been there. With non-aligned status, we've been there. And
Different
that was
sense.
hold on.
It's different
And this
sense.
is exactly, it's not possible that this country will be neutral. And we can go over the history and we will understand why, but this is probably too long of a discussion for this program. Paul was saying that with regard to non-aligned status, that exactly, that Russia was attacking at that point when we were A, non-aligned, and B, we were the weakest in our history, because we didn't know how the chain of command would work, when the then working president has left the country, has fled the country, and not taking advantage of the country that you gave your guarantees or assurances or whatever that was called under the Budapest Memorandum. What is this if not a violation of a major global context? And if Ukraine's territorial integrity is not restored, that means that the whole global context, the whole regional, doesn't have any future, doesn't have any current state, and does not have any future. So if we agree with that, and if the other countries agrees with that, then it means that it's the whole direct opening door for lots of different other conflicts in the whole world.
Can I come back on some of these things?
Yeah.
First of all, with regard to the Budapest Memorandum and it not being taken seriously enough, this was a document at the time that was serious enough that the presidents of the United States and Russia would sit down to sign in person together with the Prime Minister of Great Britain. That's how important the Budapest Memorandum is. And the fact that it hasn't been upheld seriously enough by the United States and the UK. They have not done enough to fulfill the guarantees that they provided with their signatures. It's only been broken by one party, obviously, which is Russia. But I mean, you're exactly right. It calls into question the credibility of any kind of agreement like that.
I would ask also the point that what we hear today in this current environment, that Russia still seeks an opportunity to talk to Trump and to maybe change something, and openly some of the Russian diplomats say that Ukrainians didn't use their opportunity with Minsk. Though in Ukraine today we have a discussion on Minsk that the Minsk is already too much of concessions. So really, if not, like if we are not satisfied neither with Minsk nor any future other way, what then Ukraine can propose at that moment? If some of the politicians always say that even Minsk is too much.
I think that now we just asked the question very categorically. I mean, I wouldn't say that Ukraine is not satisfied with the Minsk. Ukraine wanted to implement Minsk, but to respect the sequence, which would be normal, which would ensure a sustainable peace process in the east of Ukraine, which means first of all, security must be in place in order to ensure free and fair elections, and then to proceed to the political part of the Minsk. So Ukraine was not led to do this, actually.
True.
And this is a problem that Russia sees implementation of Minsk on its own condition. And I don't know exactly now what is worse for Ukraine, to accept Minsk a la Rus, or to accept a deal between, let's say, these two guys on the picture, President Trump and President Putin. I mean, I think Ukraine is avoiding both, because Ukraine wants to restore a sustainable peace, and it should be allowed if the other actors really want to do this. Because Ukraine now is like, Ukraine had a revolution.
I would like to add two things. Firstly, just starting from the last about the Minsk, and once more coming back to some realism, which is needed just to accept it's like a surgeon and therapy, just to accept reality as it is. For example, for Minsk, let's be honest, actually, not only, of course, Ukraine, but Ukraine also actually didn't want to implement Minsk. And it's okay for me, because the deal in Minsk, concluded in 2 years before, it was actually, in general, bad deal for sovereign country, Ukraine. That's why our tactics was to win a time, just to blame the other party. It's my opinion. You're official, but it's my opinion as independent person. And it's not bad. Then the question, what should we have something instead of this? Actually, according to realistic position, although the deal is bad, in general, we should not have anything instead, because we will not succeed to have Russia to sign something instead of this. We will not have Germany and France to signify something instead of this, and we will have United States of America just to have another deal being involved in this. It's not realistic. That's why our tactic is now just to have as it is, to prevent any kind of losses and to blame Russia for every foolish things which Russia had done before and will do ever. Then coming back to the arguments. I could agree with everything you've told about our hard position and theoretically about sovereignty, but once more, this is the world which we have now. We cannot change too much the world, especially outside of us. We have two choices, either to be absolutely right and to blame the world, that the world should change. For example, our Western allies should provide much more assistance. Our all international partners should understand much more what Russia is doing, what is the bad things which have been done against Ukraine and other states and will be done by Russia. Yes, it's okay and it's real so. But whether it will change the whole position, no. What do we now have in Syria, for example? Quite a good example. Terrible picture, much more terrible than in Ukraine. And what? The guys are playing actually on the old rules, games, stories. Would you like to have something like this in Ukraine? I suppose not. That's why our deal should be, or our aim should be, to prevent losses from our side. People, economy, and some kind of sovereignty, okay, if it's good.
What's the way of doing this that you are suggesting?
It's a complicated picture. You should not make just state every time it's my position. That we are on this, we stick to our sovereignty, any other side should do this and that. Okay, this is a good argument, this is a legal argument, but it doesn't work now. Especially it doesn't work with our partners in the West, let's be honest. Many of them are now listening to these arguments once more, just okay, politely listening to you look into your
I
eyes,
wonder how
but then
would they
internally...
react if something would have happened, God forbid, with any of their territories of that type. Would they be speaking about their sovereignty? Would they be speaking about territorial integrity? Would they be referring to the international law? I'm sure so. And then the whole picture would turn down. And Volodymyr, you are right when you were saying with regard to the 2008 Russia-Georgia war, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, okay, quite a lot of thinking people were saying, okay, this is paving the way. The way the West has reacted to that, this is paving the way for Russia's impunity, and therefore they will be actually attacking another country. And that's exactly what we are saying today, and this is right. And so we have already the history. And we also have to remember that we are dealing with the upgraded version of the Soviet Union. We should go back and remember the Russia-Finnish
Probably
war.
downgraded
We
version.
should, I'll tell you, we should remember the attack on Baltic states in 1940. And the name of the state has changed, but what has happened with Georgia, that actually the same thing that was happening then in early 40s from USSR attacking those countries. So therefore, I think that our voice is a sober voice, is a realistic voice. And that's how we have to present this argument, and not just admitting, okay, the world has changed, so we sit there and we try to take a comfortable position. We are not in a comfortable position because we are attacked. We are at war. So and yes, we are interested in making sure that we are not losing people. We are losing less and less people and wounded and displaced and dead. But unfortunately, it doesn't go only by accepting with the fact that the world has changed around us.
One short statement. It was not my argument that we should sit in and wait for something. No. The recipe is just both domestically and externally. And I've told about externally. About domestically, actually, we for the 3 years failed with many things we should have done.
And we have also succeeded in
Yes,
very many things.
Yes, but we have failed with some quite important things. And this is why
we still have to be
in general.
mobilized and continue working on those things.
I would like to continue what Ivanna is saying, that I think it's our strong position that this analogy with Georgia, I mean, we were right. I mean, when we were saying to the whole world that this is not the end, this is only part of the huge mosaics, then we were right. And our argument that Russia will continue is correct. Then we should learn two lessons from that. I mean, Crimea annexation has a clear precedent, and I'm not fond of this, parallels too much with the World War II, but this is a clear precedent. I mean, the Sudetenland. Because before the invasion to Poland, before even Anschluss of Austria, before even the Anschluss of Czechoslovakia, there was a Munich deal. And there was a clear example of what you receive when you do concessions to an aggressor who considers concessions as a sign of weakness, who plays according to the logic of zoopolitics, of a battle for survival and a battle to extinction. Now, about the compromises, concessions, I think Ukraine is ready for some concessions. I mean, Russian argument vis-a-vis EU integration is mainly an economical one. Okay, is Ukraine not ready to sit on a deal and say, let's tune our agreements, association agreement and CIS free trade agreement, so that everybody is happy about? This is compromises.
13 rounds of
Exactly.
trilateral negotiations
Exactly,
have been held, and everybody in Europe has seen that actually all the so-called economic arguments of Russian Federation have actually turned out to be purely
Baseless.
political.
Yeah, but this is what I'm about. Let me just finish. This is my response to Alexei. That basically Ukraine is not sitting and saying this is my position and no, I will not take a step back. No, we are ready for negotiations if this concerns EU integration.
Yeah.
Actually, yes. The argument about incompatibility of the economic settings between the two blocks is not really good one, because Serbia has an agreement of free trade with EU and one with Russia, and it works well. Israel has one as well. I mean, there it works and here it doesn't. I mean, of course, the Ukrainian economy has certain features, maybe different from the ones in Serbia and Israeli, but there it works, and here is clearly a political agenda. I mean, because, you know, the document which was suggested at the trilateral talks between EU, Russia, and Ukraine in terms of getting a common denominator for economic bloc was basically it was that Ukraine should exclude from the association agreement all the positions that would prevent Ukraine from joining the customs union. That was precisely the agenda, and I think this is what it lacks in the current. We don't speak up. We don't say it quite clearly. And the second argument, please allow me to remind that we had a number of countries which were neutral, because you reminded about Second World War, which were neutral, and these countries were Finland, were Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, Belgium. Most of the countries which were targeted by the Third Reich got occupied, no matter they were neutral or not, because these were target countries, and Ukraine is a target country now.
Before we I also would like to remind that we speak in the context of these recent talks anyways, which we can't ignore. And we talked to Andrew Wilson, who is the expert from the European Council for Foreign Relations from London, and he has something to say.
The idea of a second Yalta isn't going to happen, literally. You know, that was a kind of multi-state agreement, well, an agreement of the big powers. But some kind of bilateral Walmart Yalta, some kind of cheap Trumpist version of it is certainly on the cards. And it looks like being a very bad deal from the man who wrote the book, or Ghost wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. If you give the Russians what they want and don't ask anything in return, that's a pretty bad deal and a pretty bad way of starting your presidency. But all the indications are that's where Trump is heading. So Ukrainians are right to be afraid, but you're not the only ones. Strategic patience might help in the long run.
But there is also this kind of a fatalistic view that, you know, there is no way. Therefore, there are, I won't say they are very strong, but there are some talks that, you know, oh, the Ukrainians should be more pragmatic. They should understand that there is, you know, this new world order with different kind of leaders.
If I was Ukrainian, I would push back very strongly, particularly against a very narrow definition of what pragmatic might mean. You know, giving in to bad deals negotiated by other people, that's not pragmatic, or that's not realpolitik. There are some pragmatic cards that Ukraine has to play. The most important, I think, is, even on official figures, spending 5% of GDP on defence, plus the contributions from the voluntary sector. That's quite a strong card to play in a Trumpist world, where everybody is supposed to pay their own way and not rely on America. So don't be pushed into a bad deal by people who are more concerned about their relationships with America and want to, you know, make Ukraine some kind of sacrificial pawn in that. Ukraine should put its national interests first as well, and that's not a bad deal, Trump style.
We do have Minsk II process. I hope our audience, I expect to know, you know, this long time process. But it's already not the first year when we speak that it's not moving forward. So there should be something instead. And that even the Russians started to speak in a way publicly that, you know, Ukrainians didn't take into account that was what was good for them.
Well, I've no idea where Trump is at the moment on all this. We do hear that he has some kind of executive order prepared on some kind of lessening of sanctions, at least those ones which he can remove by executive order. He's probably never heard of Minsk, but certainly there's been this general campaign led by Russia and by Russian proxies in Ukraine since last September, the purpose of which is to throw all the cards in the air. I mean, there's a particular campaign on restoring economic relations with Russia. But I think all these various op-eds that we see, various people talking aloud about, strategic rethinking, blah, blah, blah. It's simply a way to negotiate around the Minsk process. Most of the proposals I've seen from Pinchuk's op-ed, Firtash's and others are just abject surrender. They're not a constructive way forward.
How would you, and working for the European policy institution, what would you say at that moment? What could we know about the British, the UK position, and also the European position on sanctions and on searching the way between Russia and the US?
I'm not quite sure what the point of Theresa May rushing so quickly to Washington was. I mean, the theory in London is to try and trap Trump into a form of words. He did say good things about NATO. The idea was also to try and get him to endorse Theresa May's earlier speech to Republicans in Philadelphia, where she stressed the importance of keeping sanctions on. Trump made those noises about NATO, but said nothing about sanctions. So what? Just because Trump says something 1 minute, he's not necessarily going to even remember it the next. So London's position is clear, sanctions stay. Whether May got any value on that particular issue out of her meeting with Trump, I don't know.
Okay, we can agree and disagree, but then if Ukraine comes today to DC, what would be an offer? What would be, the start of the talk? There would be the same talk about, let's give us weapon or let's keep the sanctions. But really, everybody says that there should, in order to talk to the White House, you need to be in a position not of the victim who frightens the world with more perils. So what would it be? What is the strategy? We didn't really hear that clearly.
Well, I guess we are forgetting that Ukraine has also a lot of things to offer as well at this time because of its very difficult experience over these 3 years. But definitely, what we've learned in terms of resistance and resilience to hybrid threats and hybrid attacks on us, what we've learned in terms of a direct military experience of the armed forces, this is definitely something that we are bringing already security-wise to the table. Not to mention that, again, I think that we are right now playing a security safe checkpoint, so to say, an outpost, as I've mentioned in one of the articles I've published here, for the free world here. And so it's a matter of fact, it's what we are doing right now. So this is already part of the offer that is on the table from Ukraine, that Ukraine is already delivering on.
Paul, isn't the offer somebody like Donald Trump administration would take seriously as something feasible?
I think the problem with Donald Trump is that he generally tends to believe the last person that he's spoken to. His attention span is incredibly short. So Ukraine can go in and we can make a pitch and we can talk about how we are a part of the solution and talk about the success of the last few years as well. I mean, you mentioned earlier on, Alexei, that we've had failures, and you quite correctly came back and said, but there have been a lot of successes. And the way that I see Ukraine, and I've lived here for a long time, I've watched the development of this country and watched us go through a couple of revolutions. And what I see in the period that we've had following the Revolution of Dignity is that Ukraine has found ways of separating the oligarchy from politics, haven't succeeded completely in doing this, found ways of separating organized crime from law enforcement. And again, we haven't succeeded completely in doing this because the problem still remains in the courts, which is, the triumvirate that's holding up that particular angle of corruption at the moment. But Ukraine has made great strides with things like completely re-establishing the way that the gas business works. I mean, that was a place where billions were sucked out of this country every single year by the pro-Zorro thing, by the police reform that we've had. So what I think is Ukraine's best bargaining position with our partners, whether it's the United States or Canada or the European Union, is that Ukraine is actually developing ways of reform and of change that will eventually be applied throughout the entire region of the former Soviet space, right? That's what we're doing. That's what we bring to the table.
That's part of the thing. Moreover, I think if you're, taking a picture of today's Ukraine, that maybe we are not, unfortunately, getting the ideal picture that we would like all to see.
Sure.
But if we are making a film of this 3 years, we will definitely see that the country is really moving in the direction that the people have chosen.
Yep.
And there is a resilience of the system inside, and there are interests that are making sure that, pushing back that it's not working very properly, but that doesn't mean that we cannot be used as a role model.
Mm-hmm.
Just immediately to this, I could agree, or even I can agree with this estimation because it's never a black and white picture, but the huge problem is about the people, they don't feel this. The majority of the people don't feel these successes.
Yes,
Unfortunately,
macro-financial and macroeconomic stabilization
and this is the key.
Does not
immediately filter down to everybody.
into well-being of the people.
but it's important. It's very important. It's crucial.
Yes, we also have a short, memory span, also as a nation, because we somehow forget that 3-4 years ago it was impossible to imagine that a civil society activist would come in to the cabinet of the minister and would suggest something that would actually be taken as an idea and implemented on the governmental level, and we just take it for granted. And all this, and we can think of tectonic changes that have been happening. So if we just try to maybe to portray our situation inside, not just black and white, and maybe you as political analysts could help us to make sure that we are seeing all the shades of gray, which are maybe even whiter than closer to white than to the black.
There is one
Let's talk
factor we
about the
haven't
deal.
mentioned, and we'll go on, that of course Germany, and we have Ukrainian president meeting German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and who had a talk with Donald Trump as well. We talked to Uli Specht, a German analyst who has a great knowledge of the geopolitics, and he spent some time in DC and now currently in Berlin. So that's what he has to say.
There are some good news. I mean, compared to what we have expected or what we have feared before, sanctions will not be lifted immediately, unilaterally. So that's part of the good news. And then we also had a confirmation in writing by the new US president saying NATO is of something like vital importance. So he has backed NATO. This is an important statement. And on the sanctions issue, we had heard last week that there may be an executive order lifting sanctions on Saturday. This was something that has been rumored. So this hasn't happened. And we don't know why it hasn't happened. So there are two possibilities. One is internal pressure, especially John McCain has threatened to turn these sanctions into law in order to remove it from the president towards the Congress. This may have made an impression on the Trump administration. Maybe they didn't want to pick a fight with Republican Congress so early on about this question. We can be maybe cautiously optimistic that this is, at least the worst is not going to happen quickly, but there are basically two ways to look at this. So one way would be that at the end of the day, Trump will become just another Republican president, at least from the perspective of Europe, relations with Russia. The other way to look at this is, well, they are ideological. They want a real new world order, a multipolar world order, and they look at it as that with Russia as one pole, the US as another pole, China as a third pole, and then they may just accept the other countries have spheres of influence and have the right to these spheres of influence.
What could be an impact of Berlin and of Angela Merkel in particularly on Trump's policy and vice versa?
I take it as a good thing that Trump talked to Merkel before he talked to Putin. Unfortunately, he talked to Hollande only afterwards, but at least Merkel was in the game before, so she had 45 minutes to make her case. And this tells us already that she is an important leader to him, and he's not just fully ignoring allies and is not just working over their head. I don't see any change. I also think that the recent Wall Street Journal article about giving Ukraine a neutral status, no NATO, no EU. I don't think that most governments in Europe think that this is what Russia wants. I think there is a consensus now among people who know and who deal with Ukraine and Russia that this is not just about EU membership. It's really about who is running Kyiv, who controls the government, and what is the room for maneuver for Ukraine. Is it supposed to be a vessel of Russia forced to move in the same direction on any issue? Is the future of Ukraine that Russia really controls the country? Sigmar Gabriel moving now into the Foreign Office, replacing Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who's becoming the German president, a more a higher office, but without less executive role. There's no change. The whole idea of compromise, I think, is seen as something that's not going to work with this Russian president. You need to show strength and unity, and if you have that, you can achieve something.
So maybe we are just all too fatalist and do not take into account all the other factors, as what Mr. Speck said, that there is no big change in Berlin, for instance, and it matters.
Actually, from my perception, there will be no great change in Berlin due to two factors. Firstly, the Chancellor Merkel is not going to change her position due to different reasons. Secondly, due to the latest change in the candidate campaign, where Schulz will be the nominator from SPD, and Schulz is just another position from Gabriel. And that's why for Ukraine, probably it's good, according to this position, that it will. But it depends on the electoral votes in September, how it will look like, and then probably we'll have some changes. But let's see.
So we had really a debate, which is good to listen and debate from Ukraine. But for the to make a summary, we did mention some of the things. We did mention how to get out of the conflict, anyways. What to do with the Crimea, but though there is a kind of a solid position here. So I'll give you really a short time, just less than a minute for everybody to finalize your thought on all these things. So what is a summary? Of course, we understand that no concessions, that's what we heard from a lot of people here, but then what?
I mean, it's difficult.
What is a proposition? What is an offer?
I mean, the feeling now, at least today, was that we are living in a hope's world, where everyone fights against everybody, which is not entirely true, I would say. Because we need to be more patient about what we do, because what we do is not possible to implement very fast. And I think that Ukraine is on the way to do this, and the fact that if Ukraine would be a success, that would change the entire region, and that is precisely why Russia doesn't want Ukraine to be a success.
What I'll round out with is we had a great history lesson from Volodymyr, and then IVANNA was talking about Georgia, and what happened after Georgia was Russia was basically, they were rewarded. They had impunity, and if Russia can be allowed to get away with their aggression against Ukraine by the lifting of sanctions or something like that, we will see a repeat of the history lesson that you gave and a repeat of what happened after Georgia, as you pointed out. The only demand from Ukraine is quite simple, that Russia must leave Ukrainian territory.
I think it's very important for our Western colleagues to think how we can avoid a major war, a major new war, right? And for example, how can we avoid in Ukraine what happens in Syria? And in this case, I mean, we can compare different scenarios. And so far, despite all the tragedy, but the thing is that Ukraine succeeded to keep this aggression very localized. And Ukraine has succeeded to be a whole country with all these difficulties. So I think this is an important message, that this is our goal to localize this, to freeze it maybe, but not to make it, you know, explode to the whole continent.
Just to conclude the results of discussion for me, firstly, we should understand that we are more deeper going in so-called hybrid world. We should accommodate to this. We should understand the rules of the world, accommodate to this, whether we do like this or not. About the deal, I'm not threatened by the deal, because actually it will be some, probably, in the best case for Mr. Putin, it could be some agreement, even referring to Ukraine, but no deal. That's why we shouldn't be threatened. And the third, the most important one, which we have not talked about this, actually the recipe is inside of Ukraine. Until we doesn't succeed to have success story Ukraine, nothing else matters. In foreign relations campaign or other Western assistance, be it other foreign partners, we should concentrate on our success story, starting from our state and economy. Until now, from my perception, we did not succeed.
And Ivana, the last from you, a wise prime minister, but then being honest, we can't just say that things are perfect inside the countries domestic.
I never said that, and I think that that's the point, that the picture is not black and white, and the picture is not fluffy and very appealing, but the picture is incredibly much better than it was 2.5 or 3 years ago with regard to the situation in the country internally. Unfortunately, we were left with such a legacy that we had to actually get out from the hole. And somehow we are forgetting that 2.5 years ago, everybody has been agreeing that there is no other way for Ukraine to get through economically, only via default. We did not have that, and we are getting from that hole out, and we have to understand that. But that's we don't have time for that debate. So I would say that for us right now is to strengthen our alliances. The way is to talk bilaterally, to talk multilaterally, to present arguments, and to continue a very hard, very concentratedly working internally here in the country. And so I think that that means that we have to be mobilized for quite a long time ahead.
So thanks you all, thanks a lot for everybody and for the great discussion. And we'll go on with further issues and topics as we understand there are a lot.